Hello, everyone. So it happened. Mark Carney just fundamentally restructured North American power dynamics, and Donald Trump is sitting in Mar-a-Lago right now realizing he has absolutely no leverage anymore. None. Because what Carney did yesterday wasn't just a press conference, it wasn't just a policy announcement, it was a complete dismantling of the assumption that has governed this continent for 70 years, that Canada needs the United States more than the United States needs Canada. On Thursday, March the 20th, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney stood in front of Parliament and said something that no Canadian leader has ever had the courage to say. He looked directly into the camera and announced that Canada is moving forward with what he called permanent economic sovereignty measures. Not temporary, not conditional, permanent. He's building trade infrastructure that completely bypasses American markets. And he's already signed preliminary agreements with the European Union, Japan, South Korea. And here's the part that should terrify Trump: Mexico. Yes, Mexico. Canada just pulled Trump's own USMCA partner into a separate deal that effectively isolates the United States. Now, let me take you back 3 weeks to understand how we got here, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. On February 28th, Trump went on Truth Social at 3:47 in the morning, because of course he did, and posted that he was considering 25% tariffs on all Canadian imports, 20% on everything: lumber, oil, natural gas, electricity, steel, aluminum. He called it fair trade correction, because in Trump's reality distortion field, buying resources from your closest ally at market rates is somehow Canada taking advantage of America. His exact words, and I have them right here, were Canada has been ripping off the American people for decades. Fake trade deals, weak borders, time to make them pay their fair share. 25% tariffs coming soon. They will beg us to negotiate. Beg, he used the word beg. And what did Mark Carney do? He waited exactly 48 hours. Radio silence from Ottawa, no panic, no emergency cabinet meetings that the press could photograph, nothing. And then on March 2nd, Carney gave a 6-minute address that was so calm, so measured, so absolutely devastating that Trump deleted his original Truth Social post within 2 hours. Carney said, quote, "We have modeled every economic scenario involving American tariffs. We have contingency plans that have been in development since 2016. If the United States chooses economic warfare, we'll not retaliate. We will simply move forward without them. Without them, not against them. Without them." That's the part that made Trump's hands shake so badly he couldn't hold his Big Mac steady. Here's what Trump didn't calculate, because Donald Trump has never calculated anything more complex than his own approval ratings. Canada supplies 31% of American oil imports. In the middle of gas prices that are already hitting $450 a gallon in California, Trump just threatened to tariff the resource that keeps American cars running. 60% of U.S. electricity in the northern states comes from Canadian hydroelectric power. Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all swing states. Notice they go dark if Canada turns off the switch. And it gets better or worse if you're sitting in the White House watching your entire economic strategy collapse in real time. Canadians supply 43% of prescription medications to border states because American pharmaceutical companies charge 300% markups. Trump wants to put tariffs on insulin that Americans cross the border to afford. Good luck explaining that to diabetics in Montana. But here's the nuclear option that Carney has been holding in his back pocket, waiting for exactly this moment. Canada controls 17% of global uranium production. You know what needs uranium? Nuclear power plants. You know who's been pushing nuclear energy as the future of American energy independence? The Republican Party. You know who can't build a single new reactor without Canadian uranium? The United States of America. Carney knows all of this. He had economists run the numbers for 8 years while he was waiting to become prime minister. Trump knows none of this because Trump doesn't read briefings that don't have his name in bold letters every 3 sentences. So while Trump was rage posting at 4 hours in the morning about lying Canadian Carney and the worst trade deal in history that he himself renegotiated in 2019, yeah, Trump called his own USMCA deal the worst deal in history. Let that sink in. Ursula von der Leyen was on a plane to Ottawa. The president of the European Commission personally flew to meet with Carney on March 7th. Not a video call, not a diplomatic envoy. She got on a plane. And when reporters asked her why she was prioritizing Canada over ongoing negotiations with 6 other countries, she smiled and said, because Canada's about to become the most important trading partner the EU has in North America. In North America. She didn't say in the Western Hemisphere, she said in North America, which implies that the United States is no longer the primary consideration. They signed a preliminary agreement on March 9th that does something unprecedented. It creates a transatlantic rare earth mineral supply chain that completely excludes the United States. Canada has rare earth deposits in the Northwest Territories, and none of it that haven't been fully developed because historically it was cheaper to just trade with the US. But now Canada is shipping those minerals to Europe. Europe is processing them with green energy, and they're building a technology supply chain that makes both Canada and the EU independent of both American and Chinese rare earth materials. Trump handed China and America's closest allies to each other on a silver platter because he wanted to look tough on Truth Social. But the real knife in the back came from Mexico City, and I have to say, watching Trump get outmaneuvered by the very country he spent his entire first term demonizing is the kind of poetic justice that almost makes you believe in karma. On March 14th, President Claudia Sheinbaum, remember she just took office last October. Trump thought she'd be easy to push around. Sheinbaum flew to Toronto, not Ottawa, Toronto. She met with Carney at a private residence, no press allowed for 11 hours. 11 hours. When has Trump ever focused on anything for 11 hours besides his own reflection? And when they emerge, they announce the Great Lakes Trade Corridor. It's a trade route that uses Canadian rail infrastructure to move Mexican goods to Canadian ports, which then ship to Europe and Asia without ever touching American soil. Mexico gets access to the Atlantic without Gulf Coast bottlenecks. Canada gets manufacturing partnerships that replace American contracts. And the United States gets to watch $40 billion in annual logistics revenue vanish. Trump called Sheinbaum the next day. We know this because he posted about it. And according to his own post, she told him that Mexico needs to diversify for economic security. That's diplomat speak, for we don't trust you and we're done pretending. Now, legally, Canada and Mexico can't just withdraw from the USMCA. The agreement doesn't expire until 2026, and there are withdrawal clauses that require 6 months' notice. But here's what Carney figured out. You don't need to withdraw from a trade agreement to make it irrelevant. You just need to build alternative infrastructure so comprehensive that the agreement becomes a formality, and that's exactly what he's doing. On March 18th, Carney announced $800 billion, $800 billion with a B, in infrastructure investment over the next decade. New ports on Hudson Bay to ship directly to Europe, expanded rail lines connecting to Mexican manufacturing hubs, a complete overhaul of the St. Lawrence Seaway to handle container ships that are too large for the Panama Canal. Canada is building a 21st century trade network that geographically excludes the United States by design. And how is he paying for it? This is the part that's so brilliant, it almost makes you weep. He's using pension funds. Canadian pension funds are some of the largest and most stable investment pools in the world. By law, they have to invest in long-term, low-risk infrastructure. Carney just reclassified trade independence as a national security priority, which allows pension funds to invest at below-market returns because it's in the public interest. He's building an economic fortress with retirement money, and it's completely legal. So you'd think, okay, Republicans in Congress are going to step in, right? They're going to tell Trump he's destroying American trade relationships. They're going to force negotiations. They're going to act like adults. Wrong. Because Trump has spent the last 8 years turning the Republican Party into a personality cult. And now, none of them can publicly disagree with him without losing their next primary. So instead, they're disagreeing privately. And we know this because 3 separate senators, all Republicans, all from states that depend on Canadian trade, have been caught on hot mics in the last week saying some version of "he's going to destroy us." Senator John Hoeven from North Dakota was recorded telling a donor that Canadian oil is the only reason we have refineries and that tariffs would end the energy sector in the Midwest. He voted for Trump's tariff proposal anyway. Senator Susan Collins from Maine told a town hall that this is economic suicide, and then she went on Fox News and said she trusts the strategy. Even Mitch McConnell, who has publicly broken with Trump on exactly 3 issues in 9 years, released a statement saying the tariffs were a complex issue requiring careful consideration, which in McConnell's speak means this is insane, but I'm too close to retirement to fight him. So Congress is going to do nothing. They're going to watch the American economy lose its largest trading partner, and they're going to do nothing because they're more afraid of Trump's base than they are of economic collapse. Which brings us to yesterday, March 20th, 2025, the day that historians are going to mark as the beginning of the end of American economic age in North America. Carney gave a speech at 2 p.m. Eastern. Trump was golfing, actually golfing while the foundations of American trade policy crumbled. And Carney laid out what he called the sovereignty framework, 5 pillars. I'm going to go through all of them because you need to understand how completely this restructures the continent. Pillar 1, energy independence. Canada will prioritize domestic energy consumption and strategic partners. That means Europe and Asia over American exports. If the U.S. wants Canadian oil, natural gas, or electricity, they pay a premium, a 30% premium index to tariff rates. Trump wants to charge Canada 25%. Fine, Canada charges America 30%. And because American refineries are built specifically for Canadian heavy crude, they can't just switch suppliers. Trump literally cannot replace Canadian oil without spending $200 billion rebuilding refineries, $200 billion that the U.S. doesn't have. Pillar 2, pharmaceutical security. Canada is nationalizing prescription drug exports. If you're an American citizen with a valid prescription, you can still buy from Canadian pharmacies, but bulk exports to American distributors are over. Canada is redirecting that production to universal healthcare systems in Europe and the Commonwealth. Americans who depend on affordable Canadian medication are about to find out what their own pharmaceutical companies really charge. Pillar 3, manufacturing partnerships. This is the Mexico connection. Canada is investing $70 billion in joint manufacturing ventures with Mexican companies. Auto parts, electronics, textiles, all the industries that used to have integrated North American supply chains. Those supply chains now stop at the Canadian-American border. Pillar 4, rare earth and mineral rights. All rare earth minerals mined in Canada are now classified as strategic resources. They can only be exported to countries that have signed reciprocal agreements. The United States is not on that list. China is not on that list. The EU, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and as of yesterday, Vietnam and Indonesia, they're all on the list. Pillar 5, technology and data sovereignty. This one's subtle but devastating. Canada is requiring that any data generated by Canadian citizens or on Canadian soil must be stored on Canadian servers. No more routing through American tech companies. No more dependence on Silicon Valley infrastructure. Canada is building its own digital backbone with European and Asian partners, and American tech companies are about to lose access to 40 million high-income consumers. 5 pillars, each one designed to make the United States irrelevant to Canadian economic planning. Trump responded at 6:43 p.m. with a Truth Social post that was so unhinged, so completely detached from reality, that even his own press secretary refused to read it aloud at the briefing. He wrote, and I quote, "Pathetic Mark Carney thinks he can threaten the greatest economy in history. Canada is a weak country with no military and no power. They will come crawling back when their economy collapses. I give them 2 weeks before they beg for a deal. America first means we don't need anyone, especially not socialist Canada." 2 weeks. He gave Canada 2 weeks before they come crawling back. It has been 72 hours and the Canadian dollar is up 4% against the US dollar. The Toronto Stock Exchange hit a record high, and applications for a Canadian permanent residency from American citizens have increased 900%. 900%. Americans are fleeing to Canada because they trust Mark Carney's economic plan more than Donald Trump's tantrums. So where does this go? Because we're not at the end, we're barely at the beginning. Trump has 3 options, and they're all bad. Option 1, back down, admit the tariffs were a mistake, negotiate in good faith, accept that Canada is now an equal partner rather than a subordinate. But that requires humility, self-awareness, and basic economic literacy. So that's not happening. Option 2, double down. Actually implement the tariffs, watch gas prices hit $6 a gallon, watch heating costs triple in the Midwest, watch prescription medication become unaffordable for millions of Americans, and then try to blame it on Canada. This is the most likely option because Trump has never accepted responsibility for anything in his entire life. Option 3, invoke emergency powers. Declare Canada a national security threat. Try to seize Canadian assets in the United States. Attempt to freeze trade by executive order. This is the nightmare scenario because it would legitimize everything Carney has been saying. It would prove to the entire world that the United States is an unreliable partner, and it would accelerate the global movement away from dollar dominance. And here's the thing, Carney has contingency plans for all 3. He spent 8 years as governor of the Bank of Canada and then as governor of the Bank of England, learning how to outmaneuver larger economies. He knows exactly what Trump is going to do before Trump knows, because Trump is predictable. A narcissist are always predictable. But there's another layer to this that we haven't talked about yet, and it's the one that should keep American strategists awake at night. On March 19th, one day before Carney's big speech, he had a phone call with the Prime Minister of Australia. It wasn't on his public schedule. We only know about it because Australian press reported it. And according to those reports, they discussed coordinated resource policy among Commonwealth nations. Now, why does that matter? Because Australia controls 28% of global lithium production. Canada controls 17% of uranium. Between them, they have enough rare earth minerals, fresh water, and arable land to supply the entire democratic world without depending on authoritarian regimes. And they're both constitutional monarchies with the same head of state, similar legal systems, and a shared history of being underestimated by larger powers. And if Canada and Australia formalize a resource alliance and bring in New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and even India, which has been making overtures about Commonwealth trade revival, you're looking at an economic bloc that controls the resources necessary for green energy, nuclear power, and advanced technology. And the United States wouldn't be part of it. Trump is so focused on China that he's completely ignored the possibility that America's closest allies might just build their own system and leave the U.S. behind. And we need to talk about what's happening on the streets of Canadian cities, because this isn't just a government policy. This is a national movement. Polling from yesterday shows that 87% of Canadians support Carney's sovereignty framework. 87% in a country where getting 60% agreement on anything is considered a landslide. 87% is unprecedented. There are rallies in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary. Cities that don't agree on anything are unified behind this. Canadian social media is flooded with hashtags like Canada First and sovereignty. Now, there's a viral video of a Tim Hortons employee in Edmonton who refused to serve an American customer wearing a MAGA hat. And instead of getting fired, the company released a statement saying they support their employees' right to express Canadian pride. This is a country that has been polite, accommodating, and differential for its entire existence, and they have collectively decided they're done. Done apologizing for universal health care. Done pretending that American cultural dominance is inevitable. Done accepting that geography means subordination. Trump called them weak. They're showing him what strength actually looks like, because here's what Trump and his advisors fundamentally don't understand. Trade policy isn't just about money. It's about trust. It's about relationships. It's about the belief that agreements will be honored and that partners will act in good faith. And over the last 8 years, through 2 Trump terms with a Biden term in between that couldn't repair the damage, the United States has systematically destroyed the trust that took 70 years to build. Trump withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership on day 3 of his first term. He tore up the Iran nuclear deal that Canada helped negotiate. He imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum and then called it a national security issue, implying that America's closest ally was a threat. He tried to blame Canada for the opioid crisis, even though the DEA's own reports show that 93% of fentanyl comes through the southern border, not the northern one. And every time Canadian officials tried to negotiate, tried to find compromise, tried to maintain the relationship, they were met with insults, threats, and 3 a.m. tweets. So Carney looked at that pattern and made a calculation. This isn't going to get better. American politics have fundamentally changed. The institutions that used to constrain presidential power are broken, and Canada needs to prepare for a future where the United States is not a reliable partner. He's not being aggressive. He's being realistic. And the fact that realism looks like betrayal to Washington tells you everything you need to know about how entitled the American foreign policy establishment has become. So, if you're an American watching this, you're probably wondering, what does this mean for me? How does a trade dispute with Canada affect my life? Let me be very specific. If you live in Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, or any northern state, your electricity bills are about to increase. Canadian hydroelectric power is cheap and clean. Replacing it means either building new power plants, which takes years and costs billions, or buying electricity from other sources at higher rates. If you drive a car, gas prices are going up. Refineries in the Midwest are designed for Canadian heavy crude. Switching to other suppliers means retooling refineries or importing more expensive light crude from the Middle East. If you take prescription medication, costs are about to skyrocket. Millions of Americans depend on Canadianese for affordable insulin, heart medication, and antibiotics. When Canada stops bulk exports, those prices revert to American pharmaceutical company rates. We're talking about a 300 to 400% increase overnight. If you work in manufacturing, your supply chains are about to get more expensive and less reliable. Integrated North American production depends on parts crossing borders multiple times during assembly. When those borders become barriers, costs increase and jobs disappear. And if you're young, if you're thinking about your future, if you're looking at climate change and economic instability and wondering where you want to build a life, Canada just became a much more attractive option than the United States. Political stability, universal health care, a government that's investing in infrastructure instead of billionaire tax cuts. That's not propaganda. That's policy. Trump is driving American talent to Canada, and he doesn't even realize it. So let me bring this to what I think is really happening here, the thing that nobody in American media wants to say out loud because it sounds too dramatic, too final. This is the beginning of the end of American dominance in North America, not globally. The U.S. is still the largest economy in the world, still has the most powerful military, still has massive cultural influence, but specifically in North America. The assumption that the United States sets the terms and Canada and Mexico follow, that's over. Mark Carney just demonstrated that a middle power country with smart leadership and strategic patience can outmaneuver a superpower led by an impulsive narcissist. And he did it without firing a shot, without imposing sanctions, without even raising his voice. He just built alternatives and waited for Trump to self-destruct. And the model works. If Canada can do this, other countries are watching and taking notes. Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, even some European countries that are tired of being caught between American unilateralism and Chinese authoritarianism. They're all looking at what Carney is doing and thinking, maybe we don't have to choose, maybe we can build our own path. This is the cost of electing leaders who treat alliances like transactions and diplomacy like reality television. You don't just lose the current deal, you lose the trust that makes future deals possible. Trump said Canada has 2 weeks before they come crawling back. Okay, let's mark our calendars. Today is March 21st. 2 weeks from now is April 4th. On April 4th, I'm going to be right here looking at the data. We're going to check the Canadian dollar. We're going to check the Toronto Stock Exchange. We're going to check polling numbers. We're going to check trade volumes, and we're going to see which economy is begging.